Um, I hope everyone is keeping themselves and their loved ones safe. While we learn that the curve in India is flattening, we are also seeing cases increasing in our immediate social circle. The good news is that the recovery rates are pretty high, but that is no reason for us to throw caution to the wind. So I hope that all of you all who are watching us today are doing absolutely safe, staying healthy, and keeping your loved ones safe too by following all important safety protocols. Very, very important that we do that. If that being the case, give us a thumbs up by pressing the like button so that we know all is well at your end. Let us know which city are you joining us from. It's always interesting to know and get to see people coming from different parts of the country tuning into Master Speak. So it'll be very nice to know as to where all our audience are joining us from. Make sure you tag your colleagues, your friends, and anyone else you want to join you in this session and have a learning experience. Now, don't forget to post your questions throughout the session. As you would know, most of you would know, the two lucky questions will be rewarded with Amazon gift voucher. But for that, you will have to stay with us till the end of the session. So make sure that you are with us, tuned in, and you're asking us the questions to be able to participate in the lucky draw. Two lucky winners will win the Amazon vouchers. Finally, as I always say, there is a mountain of wisdom that we have accumulated over the past few months through these sessions. Speakers from all over the globe, thought leaders, authors, leaders, everybody sharing their wisdom so openly. So, all of those sessions, recording of those sessions are available on our website or on our social channels. So, whatever is your comfort, please make sure that whenever you find time, and weekend is a good time, though it's still a couple of days away, make sure that you find some time over the weekend, browse through the previous sessions and see what attracts you. I'm sure you will have a great learning experience. Now, who have we got on our show today? Of course, you all know that because we've advertised it. Sally Helgesen is our master speaker for today. But let me introduce Sally to you. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Sally, cited in Forbes as world's premier experts on women's leadership. She is an internationally best selling author, speaker, and leadership coach. She has been ranked number 6 among the world's top 30 leadership thinkers by global gurus and chosen as the Thinkers 50 Marshall Goldsmith World's Top Coach for Women Leaders. Her vision has been to help women leaders around the world recognize and act on their greatest strengths, and she's been doing some incredible work in this area for many years now. Sally's most recent book, How Women Rise, co authored with legendary executive coach Marshall Goldsmith, examines the behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women. This is also the subject of our conversation today. So I'm sure each one of you joining us today are eager to listen to Sally. So without much ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sally and let her mesmerize our audience with what she has to share with us. So, Sally, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to Master Speak.
My pleasure, Rakesh, and thank you for having me here. It is a real pleasure to be speaking with an audience in India. This is one of the countries that has been most receptive to our message in How Women Rise. And I only wish I were there actually with you. Let me adjust my screen. Only wish I were there with you in person. I find my trips to India to be beautiful experience. And I love the audience and the participants that greet me there. Today, I'm going to be talking about How Women Rise, which is about the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women as they seek to move to the next level in their careers. We're going to be talking about internal barriers more than cultural or structural barriers in organizations, for the simple reason that internal barriers are something that lie within your control. But I want to be clear, this message today is not just for women. It is for women and for men. It can help women in their own development, but it can also help men in a very practical, hands-on way recognize how to be more effective mentors, sponsors, champions, and supporters for the talented women in their organizations. My message really is that we rise together, and that by knowing how to work together and understanding what others have to offer as strengths and what can challenge them, that's how we will make our organizations fit for a very demanding future. So I like a very interactive session. So I'm only going to be talking for about 20, 25 minutes at most, so that we have lots of time for questions. I find that to be the most dynamic format. And I want to start, however, I always start when I talk about the internal barriers women have. I think it's very important to start also by acknowledging women's strengths, because that's something I've been working with, witnessing and helping to build up capacity for the last 30 years in my career. And women's strengths are not only under recognized, under acknowledged, but women's strengths are, and I think you'll see when I just enumerate a couple of them, they are really important in terms of what organizations will need going forward. I've been working with this for many decades, and what I've seen is that women are very skilled at building strong relationships and put a lot of energy into that. Women tend to have a bias for direct communication rather than communication up and down a chain of command. Women like to lead from, not all women, but many women like to lead from the center of things rather than the top, pulling people in around them and creating organizations in which people can more easily connect. Now, what's fascinating about these three strengths is that they really, when you think about it, undermine hierarchies. And in my observation over the last 30 years, there have been two major forces that have served to undermine traditional hierarchies in organizations. One, obviously, is the technology with its networked and rather inclusive shape, but the other is really women, and I think that's been under-acknowledged. Women also have the strength in that they have fresh eyes to see where problems or issues may exist. Women themselves have been outsiders to the leadership mainstream in most organizations, so they recognize from personal experience the kind of perspective that fresh eyes and a new approach can bring. And finally, and this is less acknowledged, but I believe that over the next 10 years, this will become more widely recognized in organizations. Women have, and that is women's vision. Now, we talk a lot about vision in our work in organizations, but we don't often define it. And I've come up with a definition that I think serves us quite well. Vision is three things. It's what we notice, it's what we value about what we notice, and it's how we connect the dots or tell a story about why what we notice is of value. And women often notice a lot of things. Women tend to notice a lot of things happening at once, with their attention scanning the environment like a kind of radar and picking up clues. And this is the source of the intuitive powers that women have been credited with for thousands and thousands of years in many cultures. That capacity to read an environment and pick up a lot of clues. So women's attention tends to operate like radar, whereas men's attention is more likely to operate like a laser, focusing in on a specific one thing at a time and pursuing that to its logical conclusion. And that kind of laser focus has been more valued, especially at the leadership level in organizations traditionally, but today, in an environment where change is so very rapid and driven by the rapidity of the technological cycles of the world that we're in, organizations really need both kinds of noticing, the radar notice and the laser notice. The radar notice allows us, in the words of my colleague, Rita McGrath, to see around the corners, get a lot of information that relates to how things may change. And the ability, the capacity to see around the corners is definitely a strategic skill, much needed in terms of strategy. So those are some of the big strengths that women offer. And I think it's important to begin with that because the challenges that I'm going to talk briefly about all relate to the strengths and often build out of them. And what we don't want to do is address challenges in a way that undermines strengths. Now, the work that I've done on challenges, internal barriers women face, has been the work of the last 4 years, and it very much comes from and shaped and informed the book How Women Rise that I co-authored with Marshall Goldsmith. And this book is very much focused on the habits most likely to undermine women as they move into leadership positions. The inspiration for the book came from Marshall Goldsmith's wonderful What Got You Here Won't Get You There, an international bestseller. Marshall told me he's been to India 42 times, unimaginable. And part of it has been the success of What Got You Here Won't Get You There in India. And I thought, I've known Marshall for many years, and I thought the template, the guiding idea to What Got You Here Won't Get You There was brilliant. And that is that the same habits and behaviors, the very same, that can serve you well early in your career are the very ones that can trip you up as you move into a leadership position. And yet you remain loyal to those habits and behaviors because you recognize that they got you to where they are. So I thought the guiding idea was brilliant, but I didn't think that Marshall necessarily captured the habits and behaviors that were most problematic for women, and that he had a number of them in there that didn't seem to apply, at least based on my 30 years of experience of working with women leaders around the world, that didn't seem to apply at all, such as learn to apologize or stop always talking about how great you are. Don't see everything as a win-lose situation. I find in my work with women that those are rarely serious problems. So I suggested to Marshall, as a friend and a colleague, that we collaborate on a book that looked at what are the habits and behaviors that specifically undermine women, and How Women Rise is the result. So in the book, How Women Rise, we have 12 habits or behaviors. And in our very limited time today, I would just like to touch on 3 of those that are foundational before we open it up to questions. The first one that really is foundational is reluctance to claim your achievements. And the corollary of that, which is expecting others to spontaneously notice and value your contributions because you don't have a plan for, or perhaps are not willing to take a risk in pointing out what your achievements are yourself. Now, women often will either minimize their achievements. You did a great job. Oh, it wasn't really that hard. Or they will deflect. That was a terrific success. Yes, my team was great. Well, of course your team was great, but you were probably great too. You don't always need to deflect off, or people won't have an understanding of what you actually did, of what you contributed. And I find that for many women, it's most helpful to, first of all, have a very, very clear sense of what it is you are trying to contribute in any situation, in any job, in the organization that you're part of. That one that one bit of talent and commitment that really gets you excited. Be very clear that that's what you're seeking to contribute. Learn to articulate it clearly. And then use the language of contribution, I think, rather than achievement. Women can often be more comfortable using that. But here's a moment for men that to recognize when women are really struggling to claim their achievements, to step in and be an ally for them, because this is really very difficult for many women. And part of the reason is that they're trying to manage perceptions of the people around them. When I ask women who are not good at or miss an opportunity to claim an achievement, what got in their way, they will usually say something like, I don't want people to think I'm arrogant, or I don't want to come off as self-serving. So what they're doing is they're trying to manage the perceptions of everyone around them, rather than being clear about what they're trying to achieve or contribute. And the problem with that is we can't always manage those perceptions. There are always people who are going to think about any of us that they're skeptical about what we have to contribute. So that's not our business or our concern, managing perceptions. Our concern is to be very clear about what it is we intend to contribute, what we do contribute, and what the outcomes are about that. And I will say to women, and to some men, because I work with men who say, I struggle with that too, that one of the most important reasons to do that is that if you don't, the likelihood of your being under-recognized is very high. And when you go through months or years of feeling under-recognized, you will feel underappreciated, and you will start to disengage and often feel as if you don't belong in a place that's actually a very, very good place for you to be able to make your contribution. So it's an important thing, if you recognize yourself in this behavior, to think about taking a risk and learning to get more proactive about sharing your contributions. The second habit that I find is to a degree foundational for many women is overvaluing expertise. That is believing that if you can become expert at, as good as possible at the job that you are doing, if you can become that good, you will be rewarded, you will be promoted. You will be valued for your expertise. And then if someone else is promoted over you, then you're going to feel, how did that happen? I did a better job. I know more about this job. But in fact, the next job, the qualifications for it aren't necessarily always going to be having done a great job at the job you have. And you may be only proving to the people around you that you are a domain or subject matter expert in your present job, and therefore are most valuable there, and maybe that you're invaluable there. Now, it's understandable that women would overvalue expertise, because many women in their organizations, in their various times in their career, have had their expertise questioned or challenged. So you often get very eager to establish that from the start. But in my experience, most successful careers are built on three legs. The first is expertise. Yes, you have to be good at your job. But the second is your visibility. That is your ability to get known for what you're doing. And the third is your connections, and your connections are what serve and enable you to establish that visibility. So it's really important to invest in expertise and visibility and connections, and to do it at the same time. I've seen many successful people walk into a new job, a new situation, and their first question is, who do I need to know to make sure this is a success? And that's the opposite of what I often will hear from a woman who starts a new job, eager to establish her expertise. And she'll say, this job has a real learning curve. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm really going to learn how to do it and get confident in that. And then I'm going to look up and start building my allies. Those two things need to be done together. And the third habit that's very common and, again, foundational that I would like to talk a little bit about is the perfection trap, which is problematic for many women. That feeling that you are either doing everything perfectly or you are failing. There's no in between. Now, it's not surprising that many women, especially as they move higher in organizations, would become perfectionists. And part of the reason is that organizations send that message to women broadly. Organizations, Marshall and a colleague ran out a very large data study about factors. It was a coaching institute about factors that support people in their careers. And one of the things they found was that women tend to be recognized and promoted in organizations based on the perception that they are precise and correct in their work, whereas men are more likely to be rewarded and promoted based on the perception that they're a big picture thinker and their visibility and their connections. So it's not surprising that women get the message that being precise and correct is what will get them to the next job. And that's fine, except rarely will it get them to a more senior position if that's what they're pursuing, because precision and correctness are not what most organizations are looking for at the senior level. Those are more perceived of as being domain expertise. So you really will undermine your own capacity to be viewed as a leader to the extent that you emphasize precision and correctness and try to be perfect in all you do. It's very difficult to delegate sufficiently when you are a perfectionist because everything needs to be done perfectly. So how can you hand it off to someone else and be sure of that? It's difficult to take risks because if everything has to be done perfectly, a risk feels too high. So you can become chronically risk averse. But I think the most challenging aspect of perfectionism is the amount of stress it causes. It causes stress for you as an individual because you're always trying to meet an impossible standard. Human beings are not perfect. But it also causes stress for the people around you. And I do see this. I often see women being considered for very senior positions who have been extraordinarily precise and correct and have climbed the ladder as a result, but they are perceived of as very stressful to work with because of their own demands on themselves. I have never, in all my time, working with women, working with organizations, working with leaders around the world, never heard one person say, I work with a perfectionistic boss and I love it. No one says that. No one ever says that they had a perfectionistic mother and they love that either. So women can gain a great deal by addressing the perfectionism issue, especially in their work, and work is a very good place to start. So those are a few of and one of the ways to do that that's helpful is to get comfortable taking very small risks, either in your work or outside your work, so that you begin to understand what that feels like to take a risk, to do something where you know that you don't have the skills or strengths or experiences to really do a perfect job at the beginning. So I'd love to take some. I've got a few thoughts in to wrap up, but I see we have almost 25 minutes. So I would love to hand it over and take some questions. This material always stirs up a lot of them.
Yes, absolutely, Sally. There are lots and lots of questions, at least coming to my mind, and I'm sure audience, as we are speaking, I see the questions getting posted on my panel here. But we have a bit of a surprise for our audience today. So, Jesse, I'm happy to introduce one of the top women leaders from India to you on this show. She is a hero for many and someone who has made a great name for herself over time. She is the founder and CEO of Paul Writer, a strategic marketing advisory firm, an ex Chief Marketing Officer of Wipro IT Business, and ex Global Brand Manager at Infosys, two of the biggest tech companies in India. And tech is usually dominated by men, as you know, right? She's excited to be with us today, and she's going to have some interesting questions for you. So, thank you very much, Jesse, for joining in from Amsterdam.
Yes. Thank you. Sally, it was awesome listening to you. And I've actually heard Marshall Goldsmith as well speak on the topic. So I know where you're coming from. So Rakesh, thank you for that introduction. And of late, though, my corporate experience is on boards. So I'm on 4 boards now. And in my my 15 years in the other side of corporate when I was in marketing, I think some of our problems are self-made. You're absolutely right. When we don't like to present ourselves, or that's at least a perception. And typically my appraisals were negative because people would say she's brash, she's boastful, abrasive. Those were the kind of words that would come in. And I ignored it and it worked for me. But what I wanted to ask you is that we still consider women, to be the epitome of modesty, to be charming, to be flexible, multitasking, perfectionist. These are all very feminine values that are still kind of ingrained in us. So, my question to you is actually, does the problem lie with the women, or does it lie with the perception of what is a good woman? And that doesn't change whether you're in the corporate or in the home or anywhere else. So, we're brought up in a certain way, and that seems to influence who we are. So, do women just fight that conditioning, or do we need to train the workplaces to see that not as a virtue?
I think, well, first of all, I think that it would be a very difficult undertaking to try to change the workplaces not to see that as a virtue. And I do think that on one hand, that some of the values we're taught as we grow up, that insistence on being modest and always being collaborative and giving other people credit first and not giving credit. It's not an either or. You can always say, if somebody says something, you can always say, my team did a wonderful job. This is what I contributed. So there are many ways to be able to do that. But part of my concern has been with the ways in which organizations tend to reinforce expectations of these habits and behaviors. But, Jesse, what I've found, and this is something that I really encourage the women I work with, both in workshops and and when I do coaching, and I'd love to get your perspective on it, because you said you've been dismissed as brash and overly assertive. What I've found is that you have to give people a chance to get used to you, and that what happens with a lot of women when I talk about managing perceptions is that if we feel that we've overstepped, or we get a little feedback, well, you sort of spoke out of turn there, that we will withdraw. We'll take all of that on ourselves and decide not to do that again. Whereas, in fact, a more natural way things work is that people get used to. I'm going to give you an example from my own career. Before I got into this field, I was in corporate communications. And I remember being in a meeting where I was, I think, the most junior person and the only woman. And they were talking about a subject, and I thought I had a really good recommendation, so I made it. And as we were walking out of the room, my boss's boss came up behind me and said in a very nasty tone, he said, "Well, you certainly aren't afraid to share your opinion," as if, that were the worst thing in the world. And for some reason, I don't know why, I just said, "No, I'm not." I didn't say, I had a perfect right to share my opinion, nor did I say, "I'm so sorry, maybe I spoke out of turn." I didn't back off. I was very nice about it, but I just said, "No, I'm not," because in fact, that's the truth. I usually am not afraid to share my opinion. And I felt as I left, I thought, okay, my career here is over. I've really blown it. My boss's boss has this terrible opinion of me. But about a month later, I overheard him talking to a coworker, and he said, you know what I like about Sally is she's not afraid to share her opinion. So he got used to me. And this is my concern when we as women overmanage people's perceptions and try to make sure that nobody ever anywhere might think that we are, as you said, brash or self-serving in any way. That it's good to, obviously I wasn't out of line there, but it's to not try to then immediately do the cleanup work to make sure that that person doesn't have a bad opinion of me. He had a bad opinion of me. And then time passed and he saw me and he saw what I could do. And I didn't apologize or change my behavior. And he got used to it. And I think I would suspect that something like that may have happened at various times in your career. Oh, she's certainly brash. And then they thought, well, she's really competent too. And she's this, that, or the other. And they got used to it. What do you think?
So you're absolutely right. I was actually called high maintenance, which is a kind of nice phrase they had. And I actually did ask them, why'd you put up with me? And they said, that's because you get work done. So I just wanted to also comment on the perfectionism phrase that you mentioned. I think that's because you get written off as being a little high maintenance, but then you realize that if you do really well at your job, people put up with it, and that's what takes you forward. So I think, we are dealing with the need, not just the desire to excel. And I don't think that's really changed that much over the last 25 years. I did do a workshop in India, and I had one set of high achievers, both men and women. And then I also had another set only of women who they said were not on any high potential program. And when you actually went into it, the main difference was that those who were not in any program didn't actually write a good appraisal of themselves. They said, my boss would know that I'm good and he will reward me or she will reward me. Whereas those, in the high achievers spent a lot of time winning awards and writing about how awesome they were. So I completely agree with you. And I think we have to overcome this conditioning. I think modesty is one of the biggest downsides. But before I let you go, I would like you to comment also on when women get selected into a position, and if they're the only women there, there is always this worry on both parties that you're just the token women. Did you get it because of merit, or did you just get there? What's your view on taking up those opportunities?
I think you need to take those opportunities. And once again, your job is not managing the perception. That's a very negative perception. It's hard to handle. Well, and I've had women who said in engineering school, my professor said to me, you'll get a job because you're a woman. You may not even necessarily have the qualifications for that. So that's a very common thing to hear. And again, I think that your job is not managing the perceptions. Your job is threefold. Do a very good job, be as good as you can, develop the skills, the talent. That's almost, women are going to do that. Identify places where you can connect with people who might not even be that sympathetic to you, but that there's something in it for them to have a relationship with you. That is, men who may be skeptical about what you can contribute. Be a resource for them and develop those connections even when the situation isn't ideal. And find a way, using the connections you have or your external network, to cultivate your own visibility. And that will develop a better path. And so your job is not to reassure everybody that you're not a token. There are people who are going to think it that way and see it that way. And there's nothing you can do. I read once years ago, and it's really been helpful to me, that in order to be highly effective, the main thing you can do is to try to match your circle of concern with your circle of control. That is, put your concern about that which you can control. You can't control what everyone thinks of you. You can control your own skill and learning and your own efforts to build relationships that will support you and to cultivate your own visibility. Those are things that you can do. So I think that's really important. And, it's very interesting, Jessie, what you said earlier about being in that workshop and the women who are not high potential had not given themselves good write-ups, because that's another consequence of this overvaluing expertise. I have heard for 30 years from internal HR people and from executive firms that women often underplay what their skills are. Or their readiness to apply for another job. Yeah, that would be a great job, but I don't have all the skills needed to do that job. Nobody has all the skills needed to do a job that they've never done. And your job when you want to apply for something is to describe what you've done in a way that makes allowances for how quickly you can come up to speed on a learning curve for the skills you don't have, because men don't start there. I hear from search firms, women will say, well, I think this job is a good fit for me in many ways, but I've never done this and I've never done that, and I'm not sure how good my skills are in this. Whereas men will immediately start talking about why they can do the job, even though they've never done the job and may actually have less experience. So that's another example of what you were talking about.
Sally, what you just said, it's absolutely true. But the next question is from Raman, and it actually delves into why do we do that? Does experience shape our behavior? I mean, why do we behave differently from men? And how do women realize that, yeah, we're doing this, and then, change that, at least in the workplace? Do you have any advice?
Oh, definitely. First, yes, women's experience tends to be different. And then that begins to shape our habits, our responses, and our behaviors. And as noted, many of these habits and behaviors are effective early in our career, so that they become entrenched in us, and we get the message that that being a person who's modest and thoughtful and well liked by everybody and never ruffles anybody is the way to go. As we move into higher levels, that becomes less true. That's not what organizations, as a woman like Jessie knows, are looking for to lead them into the future. So the subject of change comes up. First of all, in How Women Rise, we have suggestions with every one of these habits and behaviors about how they can be overcome. But we also have, and I think I use this, I do a lot of coaching. So coaching is all about getting better and addressing what's getting in your way. But it's also, there's a real template for addressing habits and behaviors that get in your way. The first is to identify the first one you want to work on. I have lots of women who come up to me and say, I have 12 habits in this book. I have 9, I have 8. I don't know where to start. Doesn't matter. Start with one thing. And then what you want to do is you want to enlist other people to help you, because that's the most effective way to change. Again, Marshall had a huge data study showing that the people in organizations who were most likely to make long-term, positive, sustainable behavioral change were people who enlisted other people to help them. They didn't try to do it alone. So coaching is useful for this, but of course not everybody has access to a coach. Peer coaching, enlisting somebody to serve one, so you serve one another as a coach, is a very effective practice. I have done it for 11 years. I met with my peer coach yesterday. It's very helpful practice. This is what I want to work on. This is what I need to get better on. I'm going to work on this over the next month, and I need you to hold me to account to making these changes, and this is what the change will look like. I will do this, I will do that. So you have the peer coach ask you, did you do this today? Did you do this week? So that you can be kept on track for addressing what's getting in your way. And you can also informally enlist people to help you. And this is one of the things I really advocate, work with all my coachees and in my workshops, is identify people who could help you. One of the habits in the book is too much information, too much background, too many words, very common with women to be perceived that way. So if you get feedback on that, and you consider and you notice from your own experience that you tend to be, rambling on a bit, then you can say to somebody, I'm going into this meeting, we can do this even virtually, going into this meeting, and I'm trying to get more concise and clear in my presentations. Could you watch me and give me any thoughts about how you think I could improve on that? It's very easy to use this for something simple like over apologizing, which is a common female habit, opening the door to come into a meeting and saying, I'm sorry. That's not uncommon. So these kinds of habits, if you get somebody involved, can you help me? Can you let me know when you see me doing this? Or you can ask somebody you're trying to get more clear and concise. You can go to somebody who's very good at it. I'm trying to get more clear and concise in my presentations. I noticed that you are really, really good at that. You're very, very concise and get to the point in a way that's really helpful to people when you present. Do you have any tips for me? Is there anything you do in preparation? So get active about that. And if you're a perfectionist, this is one of the best things you can do, because you are really engaging in your own development, but in a slightly public way, so that that really mitigates against perfection. You're admitting what your vulnerabilities are, you're working on them, and you're asking for help in working on them, and you seem to be working on them. So you're building alliances and you build visibility for your own change in that way.
And I really agree with you on the mentoring. I was really privileged to have the company CEO at one point as my mentor. And interestingly enough, he continued to mentor me after I joined the competition. So on a personal level, which I thought was really, really sweet, and it did help. And but there's another question which I do want to ask you as my last question. It's coming from Shweta, and it's kind of a continuation of what we discussed a little bit earlier, but from the organizational perspective. So, for example, in India, there are X number of board seats that have to now be given to a woman for an independent directorship. And similarly, companies also say they have, diversity positions. So her question is there a better way to kind of position this, or is it okay?
I think there's probably a better way. Because I've seen it, and I won't mention the country, but it's a Northern European country that I've worked with that put in very strict parameters for how many board members needed to be women. And what ended up happening in the 10 boards I studied in that country were there really evolved a two-tiered board system where the people who had the real decision-making power, the real portfolios, were mostly men. And the women had did not really have access to that decision making. And I think that can happen when you have these mandates. And mandates, targets for diversity are helpful, but mandates are less helpful. That said, what you need is not here. We achieved this goal because we have X number of women in these positions. What you need is to be held to account for, as an organization, for your plan for developing more women, minorities, whatever it is, in a certain position. You need to have a plan that's going to work, a plan that invests in people's development, that gives them access to talented mentors and sponsors, that gives them opportunities to make their achievements more visible and to build the kind of support networks that any of us who have been successful know were absolutely vital to our own success, that we could not have succeeded without our support networks. So it's really about building up that capacity and having a plan for doing that, and for organizations being held to account for actually implementing that plan and providing that kind of support. I think ideally that is the best approach, that it's more effective than simply mandating certain numbers, although those numerical targets are really important. But tying the target to the process, I think, is helpful. One other thing I want to say, because I've been working with diversity efforts since they started. Not even so much because of women, but because I wrote a book in 1995 called The Web of Inclusion, which was about organizations that benefited strategically through an inclusive approach. So before diversity and inclusion were even paired, I was brought into a lot of organizations on building inclusive cultures. And in my observation and experience, it's an inclusive culture that you want to create, and that will serve diversity. And inclusive cultures are demonstrated by inclusive behaviors, both at the leadership level and by leaders holding others at supervisory levels, et cetera, to account for demonstrating inclusive behaviors. So that's, to me, a more effective approach than just a numerical diversity approach.
I actually disagree a little bit, in the sense that when the pool does not have the same number of women as men, if there isn't a push towards diversity, then you won't actually meet those numbers. So that's my final take on this. But over to you, Rakesh.
Thank you so much, Jesse, for joining us and for making the conversation so engaging, especially joining us from Amsterdam. So you're a big supporter of us, Jesse. Thank you very much for all the
I love
support.
your sessions. Thank you so much for bringing it together.
It's our pleasure. All right,
Thank
so
you,
Sally,
Jeff.
I'll take it from here, and we got a couple of minutes, so a shout out to our audience. If we've got lots of questions here, we may not have all the time to ask the questions. So I'm going to just possibly take two more questions, Sally, if that's okay with you.
Certainly.
Great. So before I take the question, Sally, I think what you just said resonates very well with us. In fact, our company, Generali, globally runs a very detailed diversity and inclusion program. And in India, we are sort of augmenting that program, and our CEO himself is championing the cause and trying to put a sort of a roadmap together and having very engaging conversations. So what you've just said really helps us, and I'm sure a lot of our colleagues watching are making notes as well. So thanks for your inputs, Sally, on all that we've discussed. Now, two questions, Sally. So the first one is the easiest one. Do I ask? Many coaches who have come on Mask to speak, because you work with leaders and you coach leaders, right? But I have seen that everybody has a different take when it comes to leadership. So what is your personal take on leadership and who the leader is truly?
Yes, I tend to think of leadership as I think we too often embed leadership and equate it with positional power. Leadership is the ability to to influence events. There are four kinds of power in every organization. There's the power of position. There is the power of connections. There is the power of personal authority. That is how much people trust you and believe in you. And there is the power of expertise. And the most effective leaders I have seen understand all these sources of power. And they recognize that simply holding a position is not sufficient to really exert influence. You need that personal authority, that feeling that you are deeply trusted and admired in the organization. That's key to it. You need to have broad connections, not just connections with people who are at the top. You need connections throughout an organization so you can really feel the pulse of what life is like and what possibility is like at every level of the organization. And of course, you need expertise, but as you become more in a leadership position, that expertise is less domain or subject matter expertise, although that certainly was usually part of what got you where you are. But it's the expertise and being able to orchestrate people to work together in a way that's harmonious, but also creative.
Great, Sally. And last question is, I'm missing the name here, but the question is pretty relevant. So when you're on a personal transformation journey that you encourage and advise women leaders to be on, what have you learned to be the most difficult part for them, and how do you suggest that they overcome that from your experience?
I think the most difficult part is maintaining your resilience, because when you're on that kind of journey of personal transformation, in my view, that usually comes because you've gone through something very tough. It would be very nice if that weren't true. For me, my own leadership journey was forged at stages of difficulty, struggling with a project that I thought was going to be very successful that wasn't, getting through the 2008 to 10 recession. These were points of real struggle, and they boosted my potential to offer authentic leadership to the people that I worked with. So I think that it's maintaining resilience because we recognize that the things that really push us toward challenges and very, very difficult to deal with. And through our connections, our networks, relationships. So my crowning advice, do it alone.
Thank you very much, Sally. That brings us to the end of the show. To all our audience, you heard Sally specifically talking about 3 habits. There are 9 more in her book, and they're full of wisdom. So I would urge everyone, if you like what you heard, please make sure that you grab. The first thing that you should do is grab a copy of that book and go through it for the other 9 habits. So thank you very much, Sally, for being with us. It was wonderful having you on the show and a very, very engaging and interesting conversation.
Thank you, Rakesh. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you for asking me. And I loved that you brought Jesse Paul in. That was a wonderful moment.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sally. And you joined us early in the morning from US. Gratitude and respect for that. So wish you all the best, Sally. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
And stay healthy.
I will.
Okay, so that's the end of today's segment. Time for me to declare 2 lucky winners, as always. Okay, the 2 lucky winners are Raman for asking the question on. No, sorry, just give me a moment. Yeah, so it is Raman and Shweta. Please send us your email IDs. Congratulations to both of you. If you are listening to us, send us your email IDs for us to ship the vouchers to you. And thank you everyone for tuning in and supporting the Master Speak series. It's been truly awesome journey for us personally. Some great speakers, great learnings, and I'm sure those of you who've been tuning in, you found the experience worthwhile as well. Now, that is not possible without thanking our community partners at Delhi Paul Writer, Resultex, and Chulini, for being with us and supporting us throughout. The next session is on 18th November, so that's going to be post Diwali. We wish all our viewers a very happy Diwali and happy, safe, healthy Diwali. We will see you on 18th November when Marianne Lewis is going to be on the show with another interesting topic. So till then, have a great Diwali, stay safe and stay healthy.